the same time, we found that a lot of non-Chinese scholars of China are sending us papers that aren't really about China, but about what China is doing in other countries. Europe and China, Africa and China, Latin America and China. And we were intrigued by this, and we did some questioning, and we found that one of the reasons is it's people doing what they can do rather than what they necessarily want to do. So scholars who in the past might have spent a lot of time working in collaboration with Chinese colleagues in China doing field research on the ground, partly because of the pandemic, but then also partly for other reasons, felt that they could no longer do this the way that they wanted to. So they started doing other things instead. And it was much easier, for example, if you're a European scholar, to study the fact in Europe and European responses to China, maybe than going to China and studying Chinese policy. Another thing we're finding is people doing a lot of work on academic narrative and discourses. That's because a lot of universities now have access to the Zhuang system, the Chinese academic writing database. So it's people finding ways of doing not necessarily their plan A, but a plan B, given the constraints that are placed upon them. And this is really where the origins of today came from. Because we thought, well, if this is happening in academia, it's happening with everybody who works in China, right? Or perhaps it's not. There's a lot of people in lots of different sectors whose daily work entails working on, with, and often in China. We know that the environment in China has changed, as well as the environment in lots of European countries too. But sometimes there's more suspicion of people working in and with China than there was in the past. So the purpose of today is to not really talk about China itself, but talk about how people are navigating the new landscapes that they face when they're engaging with China. Because whatever you think of China, it's important to maintain a focus on China, to do work with China, and often to do work in China itself. So what we hope by the end of today is that we're going to, yes, have a discussion of the issues and hopefully the new issues that people are facing as they engage with China on a regular basis. But more importantly, what mechanisms people are finding and using. Sometimes it works and sometimes maybe it doesn't work to do the things that they want to do and need to do in their engagements with China. So at the end of this, we hope that there'll be a collective toolkit of approaches that we might learn from each other, ways that we might use ourselves in our own work as we continue to study, let's face it, a country that is not likely to get less important as time goes on. Now, as I've said, we have a number of people who will be speaking from here. My concept is usually called conversation starters, not conversation finishers. And so the conversation should hopefully then continue on into the audience itself. Okay. So now, if I can, we'll move on to the more important part of today, which is listening to other people rather than listening to me. And I'm delighted that we have today Johanna Szakowska, who's the Director of DG Trade for the European Commission, who's agreed to spend some time with us today. So I can give you the floor.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sean. Well, first of all, good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure. It's always a pleasure to talk about China, no matter how inconclusive the discussions might be. And actually, very much appreciate what Sean said, that we are starting the conversation, we are not finishing it. There's no end to the conversation about China. So I think that also sets the expectation for me giving you an idea about how to engage China in a new era, which helped me a lot. But before I share with you a couple of thoughts about what we are doing, let me thank you for the whole work that you've been doing across the years, and thank you for building a community around China knowledge. Does it work, actually? It does. Because this is what informs the decisions of policymakers. So it's very much appreciated, all your efforts, and thank you very much for helping us. The topic of this conference is of utmost importance. I don't need to say it. But frankly, this is also something that is on everybody's lips. How do we engage with China in this new era? So everyone is asking this question. And as you can imagine, there are multiple answers to this. But one thing is correct. I think you're right. We will continue engaging with China. There is no other way. So we may face headwinds that we've been facing for the past years, but there is no alternative to engagement with China. So this is something to say, and I think it's a matter of how we gauge and what elements we add to the engagement with this country. Now about where we are. We have entered a very new era of relations with, and I say in plural, partners, competitors, and rivals. We proudly associate this trial with China, but frankly, it extends to everyone around. And I think we have to understand what the shift in traditional roles, but also intensity, implies for us working in the global environment, which is characterized by all types of tensions, global challenges, technological race, unstable supply chains, all that you want shapes the reality. And not only the competition intensifies, but also it is very much approached in a transactional and power-based way. And if we want to be part of the transaction, we have to have something to transact on. And I think it's not enough to say, well, China is transactional or US is transactional. If we want to be transactional, which is not a wrong thing, we have to think based on what we want to be transactional. I think this is one of the points that's worthwhile reflecting upon. For us, what's happening for us for the EU is strictly existential question for many trade partners. But if you think that EU has always been minded to play a fair game, driven by own interests, but nevertheless think about win-win solutions for everyone, stay within multilateral trade order, this is pretty unprecedented setup, and we have to think hard how we want to go forward, because not everyone needs to play by these games. So clearly we have to adapt, and you have also heard about de-risking, diversifying, and one more point, I will come back to it as well later on, protecting single market, internal market, and developing it further. Now, a couple of words on China that you know all about, but simply to put things in context. The second biggest world economy, our third biggest partner for trade and services after US and UK, which may also beg a question, why after UK? That also makes you think that maybe the potential is unexploited, probably it is. The second biggest trader in goods, again after the US, and here the gap is also pretty big because we trade 2 billion in goods daily with China and 4 billion with US. So there's some potential that we have to think how to navigate and how to use. So trade relations, investment relations are pretty robust, and most of the trade is non-controversial. Investments are cutting deep, and of course China is a source of very critical resources for our economy. But as you also know, this is a relation that is fundamentally unbalanced and keeps on being unbalanced year by year. This is reflected, if you look at the numbers, in trade deficits, 300 billion, more than 300 billion last year, long-standing market access barriers, plenty of uncertainties for our contents, and it's not that there is a problem with deficit as such, as you know. It is what are the risks that are underpinning the deficit. And this is what we have been trying to address and talk to China about. And so far, it didn't yield results. So it's not the numbers, it's really why this is so, and so because of the sort of practices, because of the export-based economic system. I heard recently the number that today China, I think, is producing 30% of all output, all manufacturing capacity, 30%. It is by the end of this decade, it will be 45%. It's massive. So the challenge is there, and the challenge will stay. And we have been, of course, as I said, persistently raising this problems with China. I honestly do not recall more intensive engagement and more broad and deep as we have had with China before the summit last July. The first half a year, we spent at various conversations at all levels to point to the problems, to look for solutions, and to prepare reasonable outcomes for this. All this in a context that has been increasingly, where the trade has been increasingly weaponized, where export controls kick in. So trying to talk a positive talk, facing all the headwinds. You have seen that summit did not yield enormous results. It was important to me as part of the engagement, by the way. So it's good that it's there, it's good that it stays. But there was relatively good progress made at the summit, even though we reiterated all the concerns from export controls to market access problems. That proves several things. That dialogue with China is very difficult. It's increasingly difficult. China is very much interested in processes, in procedures rather than in outcomes. And there is very little to make us think that they will change their trajectory. They will not. It's not just about upcoming 5-year program that we'll hear about very soon. It is simply the course of the direction they have taken, and this is there to stay. So what does it mean? What does it mean for us? And here comes the interesting part, and also something that you will be discussing. So we all agree that we have to continue talking and we have to continue engaging, not least to manage all kinds of frictions that emerge basically daily. But we have to do a couple of other things in parallel. And there are at least 3 elements that may not be directly, or at least 2 of them may not be directly related to China, but there is China in the background. Which, before I start talking about it, I think it makes us think that when looking for answers on how to deal with China, we have to look around. We have been focusing a little bit too much on thinking, how do we make China change, which is not happening, will not change, but what we do around and with others in order to try to rebalance the status quo. And I think this is probably the right perspective to take when thinking what are the measures that we can reflect upon when thinking about shaping the relationship with China. So the first, the most obvious, and I'm thinking about it from the perspective of the trade that I represent, is the whole array of what we call autonomous measures. We have been employing them more and more systematically over the past years, from trade defense to international public procurement, export control, screening of investments. And I'm sure I missed some others. There is the famous anti-coercion instrument that is still to be looked at, to be used. But these instruments have been adopted with a certain goal and purpose. And if they are to serve this purpose, they will have to be used. So the whole discussion that we are having now on economic security, on the so-called doctrine of using autonomous instruments, is exactly about this. How do we use such measures in a way that can produce some results? And to be clear, we don't expect, to be frank, that if we use IPI, that China will open the market. They will probably retaliate as they have done, and they will hit us as well. It's about showing that we stand up to the challenge, that we have capacity to take risks, to bring member states around, because all that requires unanimous standing or almost unanimous standing by member states. So there is something more in using of autonomous measures than just expecting that they will yield immediate results because of what they target. It is about building central understanding of how EU acts and that has capacity to act. Point number 2 is what the President mentioned a couple of days ago in the State of the Union speech, is doubling down on diversification partnerships. Again, we do it with or without China, but there is China very much driving the process of thinking how we build relations with partners and based on what. So yes, traditional trade agreements are and will remain part of the work, but over the past, again, it's always the perspective of 3-4 years. We've been thinking far more carefully with whom we should engage and why, whether this is digital trade, whether this is investment facilitation, whether this is work on critical raw materials, which is pretty fundamental. We think there are easier, faster ways of building partnerships with third countries, precisely in order to diversify or cut or limit dependency on China. So again, long-term work, not directly on China, but with China in the background. And that is something that we'll be working on going forward. There's a whole pipeline of partnerships, topics, and discussion that is ongoing precisely with this objective. And then there's a third element that I think we do not always talk about when we discuss external relations and trade angle when discussing China. And this is what we do internally in the internal market, how we shape industrial policy, basically how we build capacity, because I think no one will disagree that our external strength is a function of our internal capacity. And I think we've been for too long dissociating the two and not thinking about what is it that we need to scale up in order to feel more empowered, firm while responding to China, not only because we are not talking only about China these days, and how to stand up to what we face in the outside. So we will not be discussing industrial policy today, but simply to stress that if we want to be serious in designing any credible responses in the outside world, it has to be a function of what we can do internally. And this is obviously one of the building blocks that we'll be working on, not our department, another part of the commission, all the sets of together. So to sum up, if I were to capture these three elements better, I would say that if we indeed consider that we are at an inflection point in relations with China, it's an important word to say that we are at an inflection point, because that obviously triggers the thinking that something will happen. And if we want this something to happen, I think it's about being very clear what our interests are, being very clear about what are our strengths and weaknesses. And the last element, think about it mid and long term. There are no quick fixes. I think we have to forget that with one or the other individual action, we'll ever be able to get to where we want to be. We have to take a very long-term perspective, be very consistent in order to build, whatever you call it, leverage, deterrence, our internal strengths to face partners like China. So to me, that looks like a menu of elements that we'll have to think harder. It'd be very interesting to hear from you how you see this. And as I said at the beginning, the work you do is extremely important because that informs the decision thinking that we make. So I'm very grateful to, if we can continue working with you, and very interested to hear your views on the topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You gave both of your comments. Thank you.
So we have to change a bit the program. So now we have the demo of the platform. So our main objective of this program is the platform development for European discussion.
Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm Joseph from Corp. We are a partner of the project. So I will make a short demo of the digital platform. Okay, so can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yeah, every time.
I'm in the room, actually. I'm in the room.
It's at the back.
We have also online participants, so it's very important to speak louder.
Okay, yeah, I'll try to do my best.
Okay, now.
So the main purpose of the platform is supporting European China experts and other stakeholders in their research, collaboration activities, and communication efforts. So we can divide the platform into two areas. The first area, as you can see on the screen, the public service area, which is open to everyone. So there are publications, platform, news and activities, newsletter, about us, and contact tab. I'm going to go through publications, which is the most important part of this area. As you can see, we do have three different sources on the left. Outcomes of this project, EuroHub4Sino, and we do have also some sister projects, and we also published their results. And there are also some external publications as well. So you can see the filter panel on the left. So you can filter depending on the source, themes, types, and year of the publication. I'm just going to show one of the publications as an example. Okay, this is one of them. You can read the publication, and there is a download link at the below of the publication as well. So this is the third part of the platform, as I said, which is open to anyone who visits the website. We also have the second part. It's a restricted area, only open to registered members. So you need to register to enter these features of the platform. So I'm going to sign in first. Okay, internet is a little bit slow. No? Yeah, this is the restricted area, we can call it. The three main parts of this area is first, the joint marketplace, second, expert inquiry tool, and third one is online dynamic library. So I'm going to go with the first one, joint marketplace. So the aim of this feature is collaboration of the members of the platform. So users can post open positions, events, share resources, and find project partners using this marketplace. So as you can see on the left side, there is the filter panel. So you can filter by category and text. And I'm going to show one of the posts as an example. As you can see, this is the post of this event. So information about the events, you can like the post, you can make a comment, you can pin the post to see on top of the list. You can bookmark it. You can also share this event with your colleagues, with the members of the platform. And you can also send a message to the person who shared this post. Let me show that as well. So you can just send a message to the person who shared this post to ask some questions or whatever you like. And you can also click the link to reach the main page of this event. So this is the registration page of the event. So the second feature of the platform is expert inquiry tool. So the main purpose of this feature is matching the most relevant experts with each other for enhancing the collaboration between them. At the moment, only for development purposes, we have only 11 experts since the platform is not open to registration. We just put them as an example. As you can see on the left side, we do have 5 different membership types. So we aim to include business people, practitioners, journalists, officials, and researchers at the moment. So this is also our target audience. Let me open one of them, like Sebastian. As you can see, his bio is in here, his areas of interest. Also, his profile pages are in here. Let me click one of them to show. This is his LinkedIn page, so you can reach him by clicking one of these contact profile pages. You can also send a message to Sebastian internally in the platform without any hassle by clicking this message icon in here. So the last feature of the platform is online dynamic library. So the main purpose is supporting researchers in this feature of the platform. Thank you. So we support them with data sets, with news, with official documents, with publications. We retrieved thousands of documents at the moment for development purposes. We are going to enhance and increase the number of the sources. For example, as publications, we retrieve documents only from OpenAI at the moment, but we are gonna increase the number of the sources. Or for official documents, we retrieve documents from European Union Commission, but we are gonna retrieve documents from other state members or other Chinese sources as well. So as an example, let's click publications and the construct in China. On the top, there is a document. You can just click the title of the document to see the entire document. As you can see on the side, right side panel, there is a metadata of the document. You can close it. You can just zoom in, zoom out to see the entire document from here. And we also have search box. You can make free search. So any word you can enter to this box to find the relevant publication. You can also upload document, and you can ask AI assistants to find the most relevant documents from here as well. Let's say we are looking for supply chains related to China. You can just click the AI assistant And the 5 most relevant documents are listed in here. So now the platform is up and running, 100% functional, but in the following 3 months, we will train AI models and increase sources and repositories. So at the beginning of 2026, we expect it to open to all the people, as I mentioned, as target audience. So thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed the rest of the day. And I believe we are going to go with panel 1. Thank you.
Okay, so welcome to the first panel. My name is Jeremy Garlick. I'm an academic. I'm a researcher of China's international relations at Prague University of Economics and Business in the Czech Republic. I'm also a member of the EuroHub4Sino consortium. That's why I'm here today. Okay, so this panel today, what we're doing today is a community building event. We're thinking about how do we engage with China in the new era. As you know, this is the title, this is the purpose of the event. So what we want to do with these 2 panels, starting with this first panel, is really to engage with you, right? The idea is to build a community, to build a dialogue between people working on China, experts on China, people who have to do something with China. So, you know, obviously I'm an academic. A lot of us in the project are academics, but what we want to do is to broaden the discussion from not just academia, but broaden it into other fields of expertise so that we engage with all of you. So when I say other fields of expertise, I mean journalists, officials, NGOs, a wide range of different people are interested in China. We're trying here to bring them together. From my experience of going to academic conferences, it ends up being, you know, obviously just a discussion between academics, and we're all talking about our papers and our publications. And I'm aware that for a lot of other people, that's not necessarily that interesting. You're probably more interested in practical issues of engaging with China. So what we're trying to do here with the first panel is to bring in a different range of people, not just academics. We do have academic representation, but to broaden the discussion with some different perspectives of working with China. So what I'd like to do today, really the main question I'd like our panelists to engage with, but also the audience, is how do we engage with China? Basically, what is our professional experience of working on China, researching China, doing work with China? From all of your different perspectives, what is your experience of working with China? What are the difficulties you have? What are the problems you have? Maybe what are the good experiences you have? I don't know. You know, maybe you have some better experience of working with China. Maybe you feel like the situation is getting worse. If so, how is it getting worse? What is becoming even difficult? Things like this. So the panel is not about me, but just to sort of launch it off. I'm an academic researcher in the Czech Republic. So I don't want to go into too much detail on this. I don't want to just start the panel, but my experience of being an academic researcher of China in the Czech Republic is that the environment for doing work on China is basically getting worse, and because the debate has become very politicized in the Czech Republic. For instance, we had a minor in China studies. A minor in China studies has been cancelled. It's now being turned into Asian studies. So it's disappointed me because precisely in an era when we need more engagement with China, more experts on China, in my university, we're getting less interest in China because of the politicized nature of the Czech engagement with China. Czech students don't want to work on China. They're more interested in Japan or Korea because it's cooler, right? So it's becoming, you know, in a way challenging for me that there are fewer and fewer people who want to engage, students that want to engage with China. We need more experts in China. Obviously, we need to engage with China. We need to understand China. My experience is we're getting fewer people. We're going to have fewer experts on China than we had before, and it's becoming harder to find people with expert knowledge on China, Chinese language, or who've been to China. Right? It's difficult for me now to find students who even have been to China. So it's not about me, so I'm going to introduce our panelists, or just an introduction. So we have very pleased that we have James King here, who's worked as a journalist for the Financial Times for 28 years. I understand you no longer work for the Financial Times, now at Chatham House, but he's going to tell us something about experience of doing journalism on China, the challenges of that. We have on my right, we have Professor Anja Sens, who's a professor in Heidelberg University in Germany. So she's going to tell us about challenges or situation of doing China studies in Germany. And then we have Claudia Francavilla, who's from Human Rights Watch. You told me you're not your main focus is not China, but you do some work on China, but your focus is broader. But I'm interested to hear about the challenges or the issues you have in engaging with China. So let's start, Anna. So let's start with James. Yeah.
Thanks very much, Jeremy. It's great to be here. Good morning, everyone. As you say, I've shape-shifted of late. I'm no longer a journalist. I left the Financial Times at the end of last year, and then I spent 3 wonderful months in Berlin with Merrick's, and I'm now in London with Chatham House with my colleague Yujie. So I'm an old dog trying to learn new tricks. I think that's what I would say. I would like to talk about journalism in China. Obviously, I've actually been doing it for longer than I care to admit. Let's say more than 35 years. 20 of those years were in China, and a bit in Hong Kong and a bit in Taiwan. The story I'd like to start with, I think, encapsulates the whole challenge of understanding China, and it also accentuates the impact that China can have on the world today. This is not going to be a news story for any of you, but I'd like you to, with me, look at it from the perspective of news reporting. So on January the 27th this year, it became clear that DeepSeek had made a breakthrough in large language models, and within one day, $589 billion worth of value was wiped off the stock of NVIDIA. And this is known as the DeepSeek moment. It's sort of a bit like the Sputnik moment, when suddenly everybody woke up and realized that China was, well, certainly a peer competitor in some aspects of AI to America. And they also woke up to the fact that they had never heard of DeepSeek. Suddenly, this company that was completely unknown emerged and had the power to wipe nearly 600 billion off the share price of the world's most valuable company. So I think that story tells us quite a lot. In fact, this was not the first reporting on DeepSeek. I went back and I looked at what the FT had been writing, and the FT had a very full story all about DeepSeek in July 2024. So it just shows that, well, I mean, to me anyway, it shows that there is quite a lot of reporting on China, but we live in a completely different media world these days. We live in a world where people generally consume media by their social media feeds. And if your social media feed is not being flooded, you don't pay attention. I mean, this is true of myself. I think it's true of everyone now. So these little nuggets, stories that may not come to your attention, they're often there, but people don't read them. And I think that's the case with DeepSeek. So to me, this whole issue shows 2 things. First of all, it shows the disruptive power of Chinese technology. And, you know, for anyone who's been following my writing, I've been saying for a few years now that China is now the leading technological power in the world. It's overtaken America already. And if anybody really cares to watch the news, you can see new breakthroughs almost every week. The one this week was that BYD has developed a car that's the fastest supercar in the world. it's overtaken the Bugatti Veyron, I think it's called. That's just one example from this week. The next conclusion that I have is that the information asymmetry between the West and China is such that when moments like the DeepSeek moment occur, we find ourselves completely flat-footed. And this has in the case of the NVIDIA share price, immediate ramifications, but it also teaches us how little we know of what's going on in China. And I think it's this combination between China's technological disruptive power and the information asymmetry that is a new combination. It's a combination I think we're going to be dealing with in increasing intensity over the next decade. And we've already heard that China intends to be the world's leading manufacturing power by far, producing 45% of global industrial output by 2030. Imagine what that's going to feel like if we all get spooked by the DeepSeek moment now. What will it be like when China is so utterly dominant across a cross-section of technologies? So that's just a bit of a preamble. Let me very briefly, if I may, Jeremy, talk about what the media situation is like in China. So the biggest thing to say is that some of the world's most powerful media companies in China are very much downsized now. So I'm not at liberty to give you numbers, but obviously I still have friends working for all the media companies in China. Let me give percentages, okay? So the Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Bloomberg, they're all down to about 2 or 3% of the personnel that they had in 2018 in China. In some cases, they're down to nothing. So that would be less than 2%. The reason for that is US-China tensions, and China's just refused to give visas to foreign journalists going to China, or it's kicked out a whole load of foreign journalists. So this is a very important reason for the information asymmetry that we face at the moment. The other reason, I think, is what I already mentioned about social media flooding the zone. A lot of people who are not in China are opining on China. And that means that whatever those guys who are living quite difficult lives, I mean, it's not easy as a reporter in China, whatever they're producing is often just ignored or not really paid attention to, even though from my perspective, those people are providing more valuable information than somebody sitting in London opining on what he or she may think about China, because they're closer to the source. So I think that's the first thing to say about reporting on China. It's incredibly difficult these days to get what's called a J1 visa. That's a resident journalist visa in China. And it strikes me, this is something that governments should be doing. They should be pressing the Chinese to provide more of these J1 visas. The next really important aspect, I think, which is often overlooked, is the J2 visa. That's a visa for a short visit. I got one of these last year to go to Shenzhen. And let me just describe, first of all, the process and then what I found when I got there, because I think granularity is important on these topics. So the process was several lunches and dinners with the Chinese embassy in London to persuade them that this is a trip that they should grant. In my case, this was not an onerous experience because I know those guys in the embassy quite well. We've been dealing with each other for years and years. But it was time consuming. Then I had to get an invitation letter for each of the 24 Chinese tech companies that I was visiting in Shenzhen. That is a process that took 6 weeks, and I'm really not exaggerating here. I hardly did any of my other work for 6 weeks. It was, you know, you have to get in touch with a company, you have to get somebody in the public affairs department to engage with you. Then that person is going to send you a request for a letter. You have to, you have to get them to send you a letter. It has to be signed by the right person. And then when you've got all of your portfolio of letters ready, you take them to the embassy and they find tiny little discrepancies, such as somebody's written their signature through the stamp. You have to go back and get another letter, which is not where the signature is not written through the stamp. Huawei was the offender in that case, you know. So this really is a treadmill, and it's a fair deterrent to allowing journalists to go to China. When I got there, I found that the opposite was the case. I found people incredibly friendly. I got to all of the companies that I've been invited to. I got very open briefings. Quite a lot of the people who were briefing me were not being shadowed by anybody from the local government. They were quite often unguarded. They would tell me stuff off the record that I certainly didn't expect. So, you know, it strikes me that there is an issue with bureaucracy, getting to China, getting the approval. When you're there, it seems really it's quite a fruitful occupation. So, so I think my takeaway from this would be the information asymmetry is becoming a big impediment to not only the world's understanding of China, but also the early warning system ahead of disruptions which are going to come thick and fast in the next 10 years. And if we in Europe are not briefed or not prepared to understand these, we're going to be flat-footed. So I think that's the first. The second is that, you know, quite minor things go quite a long way in dealing with China. And I'm talking really about personal relations. You know, the fact that I've been dealing with the Chinese embassy in London on and off for 30 years definitely helped me get a visa. The fact that they kind of know that I'm a pretty straight kind of guy, I just say what I think and I don't have any agenda, also, I think really helped me get a visa. So I do think that, you know, individual contacts with people in the Chinese system really does help, because maybe I'm wrong about this and maybe others in the room will know better, but I think Chinese officials are held personally responsible if your trip goes wrong. And therefore, it is important for them to have a level of comfort. I think that's it. The last thing I'd say is that just as we were hearing earlier, the locus of China research, China journalism has now shifted in the same way as research is shifting a little bit to other places, mostly Taiwan and Singapore. And most of the Bloomberg reporting from China is done from Singapore these days. And a lot of journalists moved to Taiwan when they couldn't get their visa for the mainland. It strikes me that this is not in the interest of the People's Republic of China. I'm very surprised they want to have their country covered by people in Taiwan and Singapore. I think that they're making a big error. And I think that they have a great story to tell. I think China's technological rise is an extraordinary story. And I really can't understand why China remains so resistant to allowing in not only journalists, but researchers and all kinds of people to go there and to really see this, because the facts are there on the ground. If they open the doors, we cannot but report what is there. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Well, that's a real eye-opener for me to hear about the visa process and the difficulties there. So let's go over to Anya, who's going to tell us about the situation in Germany.
Yeah, thank you, Jeremy. So hello from my side. It's great to be here. I would like to give some general observations from academic fields in Germany. Not so much talking about personal experiences, and I would like to do it according to three aspects as an input for the discussion. So it's about barriers, it's about access, and in a way it's about adaptation. So speaking about the barriers, I think first of all, from a research perspective, since 2013, there has been a steady deterioration in academic working conditions in China with regard to academic freedom in particular. And since around 2019, cooperation has become more difficult from the European side. So we have two effects that lead together. Speaking about the European side and the German side in particular, but basically it's a European perspective, I guess. My first point would be there are more legal and bureaucratic issues. So scientific cooperation is becoming more difficult, in particular due to numerous export regulations, but as well institutional guidelines and regulations in the context of funding applications that complicates exchange with China. This means basically paperwork has to be done in every contact with China, requiring individual researchers to undergo legal checks and make diverse statements ranging from data security to ethical concerns. And just to give you an example from the German universities, that begins with hiring a student assistant with a Chinese passport. And so you have to explain where he comes or she comes from, what is the background, and there's no problem with export regulations. And of course, that ends on the other hand with obtaining a visa from Chinese nationals coming to Germany, where more additional approving now is necessary. As well, project applications must include ethics and security passage. This is a general trend, but one that poses in particular challenges for China research. And I think there is as well currently a lack of kind of clarity of regulations that makes it more complicated as well on the Chinese side. So inviting colleagues from China, they sometimes face difficulties in bureaucratic sense that they have to give more evidence or more papers. And on the German side, we say, no, this is not a regulation from the embassy or from the consulate, but this is required on some parts in the bureaucracy in China. By the way, as well, there are less air connections, which makes it a bit more complicated if you have a very short time schedule. My second aspect with regard to barriers goes to the public debate. So in Germany, there has started a sometimes kind of heated debate within the scientific community about the, I would say, morally correct position to take towards China. And that mainly concerns sinology, humanities, and social science research on China. While the natural science and engineering field argues more they are politically neutral and continues to cooperate depending on the areas they find, of course, within the regulations. In principle, this discussion I'm referring to is about how with an increasing politicization, the danger of political appropriation, instrumentalization, and subordination to ideological framing can be countered. And this is really a kind of unpleasant debate that as well finds its way in German newspapers and is really partly done in a very uncomfortable way, in a sense of unfriendly. My second point I want to talk about is access. So there are current challenges, in particular from the perspective of China studies. I have 4 aspects in mind. So one is the former counterparts in China and Chinese universities are missing. And the topic and research areas have changed significantly. So former trustworthy and long-term good partners have very often withdrawn, been transferred, or taken early retirement, often because of political pressure that was too high, or the remaining scope for action was too limited to be meaningful in their eyes. The successors often are already strongly socialized in the system and operate within a narrow corridor of political guidelines, which as well makes it difficult to start a meaningful cooperation. Themes and topics have changed significantly. So on the one hand, many new subjects have become politically sensitive over time. So for example, no longer just the well-known political topics are to be mentioned here, but also like economics, history, archaeology are becoming sensitive areas for cooperation. On the other hand, restricted access has led to a sharp increase in remote research. We have listened to that from Sean has mentioned it at the beginning. So research based on types of digital data, one could say, and that of course carries the risk that assertions or allegations cannot longer be verified against real world facts. That's a little bit what James has mentioned already. And I think that leads the perception of China in Europe will become further distorted. So this is kind of really dangerous in my eyes. My third point is the issue of data access. That includes challenges as well, parallel to an increase in remote and data-oriented research. More and more information, documents and data, on the other hand, materials of interest for researchers, are disappearing in China itself. And so in other words, they have been removed from libraries and internet. And so this, of course, creates difficulties for collection of materials. And I would as well say there is a lack of funding schemes that would support such kind of archival long-term activities. My fourth and last point is that also travel options have changed significantly in the last 12 months, given the visa-free travel to China. Political tensions result in very interesting and in hesitation to visit China. So even those from Germany very familiar with China are now reluctant to travel there. And you have mentioned that as well with regard to students. We can see that students are less interested to go or to study in China. That is partly actually what as well James has mentioned with regard to the totally different media world. So they're kind of losing as well some kind of their social relations by going into a completely different system in China. But of course there are other reasons as well, security concerns and so on. This all results in changes in the study programs, or at least challenges for, in particular, China study programs. And on the other hand, there is a rising interest of Chinese students to come and study in Germany or in Europe, I might say. The rising number, however, will lead to new challenges in teaching. And several times already colleagues from my English-speaking countries and my latest experience from Korea have told me that one should consider the Chinese students and maybe not speak too negatively about developments in China. So one could say this idea of hurting the feelings of Chinese people has sometimes the negative, in that sense. Hurting the Chinese people, of course, is a political catchphrase from the Chinese government. Finally, adaptation. So how to deal with the situation? What are we doing? I think one new way of exchanging ideas is instead of going to China is inviting colleagues to Europe to talk with them in a more relaxed and informal, non-public atmosphere, because that is hardly possible in China anymore. And everyone has become extremely cautious of what they say. As travel has become easier and China appears to be interested in promoting exchange with Europe, there are currently numerous unexpected opportunities for colleagues to come to Europe and Germany. In some cases, even for longer periods. That was before not possible, so that's very interesting. Another aspect of adaptation is when seeking new partners, it became more important to do these kind of background checks from a formal point of view, but as well with regard to research, the positions in the universities, the positions people have taken in the public, so to learn more about them. And of course, these background checks as well relate to universities that might have military relations, which is a complicated fact, of course. Finally, going out for fieldwork, and that has been mentioned as well, needs much more preparation in terms of a careful risk analysis, and includes the fact that sending out, for example, PhD students for field research became much more challenging, ranging from data security to concerns regarding local partners and interlocutors. And there has been some funding support from one of the ministries for going back into this kind of field work. And so we are now going or getting first experience on how this is. And I think that that is as well a post-pandemic effect. So I think there is something that is developing now in the right direction. So overall, China has appeared somewhat more open, I think, in the last few months now. If you want to travel to China, and China is also thriving for stronger exchange with Europe again. But as well, what I notice is that there is a very small opinion corridor for like more a bit of a public debate, in a sense that Chinese counterparts very often support this idea or try to make the ideas strong that Europeans should say very bluntly, break up with the US and get their own perspectives and so on. So that's very interesting with regard to political messages as a subtext of conversations you have with Chinese researchers. Maybe that's from my side, and we can discuss later in detail things.
Thank you, Anya. Yeah, I just briefly say it seems like the situation in Germany and the Czech Republic is quite similar, in fact. Let's turn to Claudio. So we're going to hear a completely different perspective from the perspective of the Human Rights Watch.
Thanks. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for the invite. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's remarkable that I see from the panel as probably the least expert on China in this room. At the same time, as a generalist, so maybe it helps if I first say what I do, which is I advocate, I lobby the European institutions on human rights issues. I focus on foreign policy, and I cover Asia and a chunk of the Middle East, currently the hottest chunk of the Middle East. As such, I have been very much focused on China in my advocacy, in my work for many years, with frequent interaction with its institutions, MEPs, the AAS, and so on. I will touch briefly on some of the challenges, indeed, that we face on a practical term. I'm not here to tell you how bad the human rights situation in China is. I hope you know that there was a report from the UN High Commissioner a few years back that found that China was responsible for crimes against humanity, for the crimes in Xinjiang, or I would say against the Uyghurs population, also outside of Xinjiang, and the complete destruction of basic freedoms in Hong Kong, the cultural education in Tibet, and systemic surveillance that you have throughout the country, which are at the core of the reasons why probably many of you cannot bring your phone or your laptop in China, etc. You know that it's quite difficult one. So in a country where we have no access, a country that has a firewall, and a country where you do have a sense of fear also from a large part of the population to touch upon even some topics. How do you do research? So from a methodological perspective, and again, I'm not the researcher on China Human Rights Watch, but I relate to you what I hear from my wonderful colleagues. First of all, what you do is you analyze China's own laws and policies and the documents that they issue. Many times those documents are per se evidence of human rights abuses. We use satellite imagery. So, like, when we looked at the camps in Xinjiang, we could see where they were located and how big they were, and make an estimate of how many Uyghurs were held into these camps. We interview the diaspora communities, be it in Central Asia, be it across Europe or elsewhere, in Turkey and in Thailand and so on. We reverse engineered an app, one of the apps that was used by the police in Xinjiang to monitor the families of the Uyghurs. We see what China does at the UN in foreign policy in the region and beyond the region, and indeed we document cases of diaspora harassment throughout the world. When it comes to, and we put out a lot of reports and press releases, and it's my job to bring to the attention of the policymakers. And when it comes to advocacy, I think the main challenge we face is coming up with a viable theory of change for China that the policymakers would buy into. The policymakers will tell you, yes, we know the situation is terrible, but we need China. But we have to engage with China. But we have to handle China. It's always this kind of as slogan. And it's hard to persuade the policymakers to make a change, to make a shift in the way that they handle China. Part of that is also on due to the EU's own architecture, especially for foreign policy. You may know unanimity is a rule when you want to have a statement, when you want to have conclusions, when you want to have sanctions. And so China, as any other actor in the world, knows very well that you just need one member state on your side, and you will not have the sanctions on Hong Kong because they will object to that. And this is a bit of an infrastructural handicap, if you will, that the US, when indeed the EU adopted the sanctions against a handful of individuals and entities involved in the crime against humanity in Xinjiang, at a stroke of a pen, Beijing retaliated with no sense of the rule of law, no sense. The EU was not sanctioned because of its own human rights abuses, but because it dared to criticize China's and to act upon them. And that led to a sense of fear of retaliation in the institutions. They know that there is always a strong counter-reaction from China if anything is done. A fourth challenge that we face in the advocacy is that China continues to be seen mainly through economic lenses. So the impact, how to handle, how to balance the imbalance in the market. It's something that we as NGOs, as human rights NGOs, we are not economic experts, of course. That's not our job. We do look at business and human rights. We try to be creative. We send, I will just cite examples from a letter from last year that we sent to the Commission as they were engaging with China on the tariffs on the electric vehicles. And we invited the Commissioner to look at forced labor as a unfair competition practice from China, because forced labor is free labor. And that also plays a role in which that then goes to impact on the market. So we're trying to find ways to craft a message that can perhaps appeal to economic operators. We have also worked a lot on the CS3DDD, the due diligence regulation that is currently being borderline gutted, and the forced labor regulation, of course. And So the idea there being that we should at least try and put a cost on the abuse, a cost on crimes against humanity, a cost on the pervasive repression that you have from Beijing. If instead we look only at the economic terms and at the mere data of how much flow of cash, of goods, of a trade in from one side to the other, and we try to balance that, and we forget about what's behind and some of the abuses behind, and how are those revenues used by the government to indeed intensify its repression, to have ever more, to develop ever more so sophisticated surveillance technology to detect all the time the slightest sign of protest on Weibo or whatever it may be, and people get intimidated, get a phone call, get censored. Then the risk is that we are feeding the giant, feeding the monster, whichever you want to be. And I get to my last point, which is about the systemic hierarchy, which is one of the three, if you will, definition that the EU has on China. The difficulty that we all have when you try to develop a theory of change on China is indeed that we are dealing with a deeply ideological animal. The government will do what is convenient to the CCP. What matters is not what's right or wrong, what's ethically or morally correct or not, but what is in the interest of the CCP. There is no election, there can be no shift in the government. Sure, the Politburo, the institution can take one direction or the other, but not out of the will of the people, more out of calculations and some sort of internal politics. And this makes it so that China, as it's plays the long game, it's stable. It knows what's going to do in 10, what it wants the world to look like in 10, 20, 30 years. Whereas here we are dealing with an institution where one election in the EU can literally change everything. Not only the European election, but say an election in France that goes in a certain way. Say an election in Italy that has already gone, or in Germany, or other places. And again, given the institutional weakness that is there in the unanimity rule of the foreign policy in the EU. And this ideological game is being played by China on the socials, trying to look for Tiananmen on TikTok, right? It's played in the UN, where the norms are written about what human rights mean. As you may know, China is championing this idea of the right to development as the top right to which all the other rights are subordinated. So we can sacrifice freedom of expression, freedom of religion, etc., for the sake of the development. The EU delegation in Geneva is making a great work trying to counter that and to assist all the efforts that the Chinese are doing, but for how long? And the charm that the economic charm of China, and the political charm of China with the so-called global South will eventually perhaps fail when it comes to the UN, when it comes to how the country will vote on some issues and reshape the norms that determine what we can do, what human rights are. And so it is hard to cut, to quote Madam Sylvie Foster from what she said earlier, how to train China from how to handle China, because the way China behaves is indeed this deeply ideologically rooted way that is very hard to handle, and as it becomes more and more strong, more and more rich, more and more influential, the risk is a race to the bottom when it comes to human rights. The risk is more and more people even in Europe saying, look, they are the best one, they're the fastest car, they're the best AI. So maybe they are better than us. Maybe their model is better. Maybe we should copy from them some issues. And this is, I think, the longer game that China is playing, and I'm not sure that we are playing that game. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much for that very interesting perspective on it. I think we're going to open up this community building, so I'm going to open up your questions. But I think that the sort of question that comes out of it for me from everything is how do we, and I don't know if there's any answer to this, but how do we persuade the Chinese to improve the conditions for engagement, right? Because it seems like we all have problems with this. But rather than focus on that, we only have about 20 minutes left. I'd like to engage the audience. If anybody has, any questions, any comments, any experiences, just please, I see a hand at the back, please introduce yourself and give us your questions or comments, anything you have. Right, so this first question over here.
Yeah, thank you very much for this engaging discussion. So my name is Oliver Diekmann. I'm a trainee in the European Parliament for the MEP Engin Eroglu, who heads the delegation to the PRC. And so what I would like to know is how we would factor in China's support to Russia in their war of aggression. Well, some more context, for example, my MEP that I'm working for is very public about it. He proposes that improvements on the EU-China relations do depend on the stance of China and their support towards Russia. So, and I think this is also a question which is obviously in the mind of many, many people, including in 2 days there will be an ordinary meeting of the China delegation in the European Parliament, and they also discuss just these questions in the China-Russia alliance in a multipolar world order. So I would be very curious on your take about that, because I don't think that we can really change China's stance in their support, as we have seen lastly on the military parade on September 3rd. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Before we go to the panel again, I don't know if there's any more questions. I can collect a couple more questions. We have another one over there. Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Christina Blitz. I'm from the German Academic Exchange Service. And I would just like to add one thing to this very broad overview of relations with China, especially in academia. We are witnessing not a rising interest from the Chinese side, actually. We are witnessing not even a complete recovery from the pre-COVID era. So that would be something that I would like to hear your take on. So what is your idea of maybe stabilizing this number and not having it even reduced in the next future? And another point is, I'm not sure about the knowledge base that you are providing, but I would like to add to the entire conversation that China still should not be considered a monolith. We should still see China as also with varying interests, with also very provincial interests that we could consider when dealing with China. We see that in research and academia. And what is your take in other fields on this subject?
Thank you. Very, very interesting questions. If there's one more, that any others? Yeah, let's have one more from Sean.
I'm going to try and answer your question then about how China can make it. And in some respects, they have, right? I mean, they've created visa-free travel. I don't know about other people, but I'm getting like an invitation a month to a forum somewhere or other in China to participate. The problems are whether you want to take advantage of that. I mean, it has been opened, it has been made much easier to go and participate, but whether A, we want to, and whether B, we're allowed to. So, for example, on my Irish passport, I can go visa-free travel to China, and my university won't let me. It insists that I have to go through the process of applying for for visas and a whole range of conditions. And then you've got the question of whether you would feel comfortable, for example, accepting funding to attend a conference in China, given the reputational consequences that that might have. So it strikes me that once the perception has shifted, then, if you like, material change doesn't necessarily help, because you can make it easier to participate, easier to go, but if the perception of the consequences of taking advantage of that are negative, then I think we're in a very difficult situation.
Okay, there's one more over here. That's one more, and then we'll go to the panelists. Yeah, we'll take one more question or comment, and then we'll go to the panelists.
Thank you. My name is EuroHub4Sino. I've spent the past 5 years in Taiwan, so it's really nice, and also would like to confirm what you said about the journalist community living there, and also the vibrant community that's being created. So I was wondering if you, in your engagements with mainland Chinese contacts at any level, if you raise this question, what is their response, or whether they think that they're not losing out or actually it's backfiring? Because what we see in Taiwan is really something that contributes to our understanding in Europe of cross-strait relations, Taiwan and China. So I was wondering if you could comment on that. Thanks.
Okay, let's go to the panelists. I think some of the questions are being directed to James, so maybe we can start with James. Yeah.
Thank you. Perhaps I could just address the China-Russia, well, it's not officially an alliance, is it? But the China-Russia relations. So I think the thrust of the question is this changeable? And we all saw the extraordinary, visual expression of this with Xi Jinping and Putin in China recently. My sense of this is that, China-Russia relations are always fractured somewhere deep beneath the surface. But at the moment, we're certainly not seeing any sign of change. And I think that there has been a substantive shift over the last decade. So there used to be no bridges at all across the Amur River, which forms the 1,000 kilometer border between much of Russia and northern China. Now there are 3 bridges. That has led to a real boom in trade. As you know, there is already the Paris-Siberia 1 pipeline sending, I've forgotten how many million cubic meters of gas from Russia to China, and there are negotiations and a commitment to build another one. So there've been, I think, about 90 joint military exercises between Russia and China since 2003, and most of those have taken place since 2018. And if you look at the nature of these military exercises, they're now spanning sea, land, and air, and all of the communications required to have those 3 arms of military forces working together. So that means that there's a great deal of coordination between the militaries. If you look at military hardware, going both ways now, but obviously in the early days it mostly went from Russia to China, but now China's latest generation of jets is really impressive, as we saw in the recent Pakistan-India clash, obviously Pakistan using Chinese technology. So there are very, very deep roots in a way, to an extent that there wasn't even 10 years ago. So even though there are always undercurrents between China and Russia for all kinds of reasons, territorial disputes, political issues, other sort of cultural issues, I think that at the moment, the way the world is configured, we're going to see these 2 remaining very strong partners for some time to come. Maybe I could just, do you want me to do, okay. Taiwan, I think It's a very good question. What do Chinese officials feel about Taiwan these days? As you well know, this is probably the most difficult subject to get Chinese officials to open up about. There's almost a shibboleth that if you're talking about Taiwan to a foreigner, then you better not say too much. And so I think I think that, you know, China's basic policy towards Taiwan hasn't changed. I think that paradoxically, I think lately, last couple of years maybe, China would be getting more confident about Taiwan because in the very important dimension of technology, it was clear that China was lagging behind Taiwan, TSMC mostly, by quite a long way. But if we look at what's been happening over the last even few weeks, actually, in terms of chip technology, it's very clear now that China is beginning to make headway and catch up. So my sense of this big picture is that China's not feeling particularly insecure at the moment. I think that the issues that you point to are definitely on the radar, but I don't think that those are the big strategic issues that Beijing is concerned about. And I think on the big strategic issues, which is military strength and technological rivalry, China is probably winning or making headway, put it that way. Yeah.
I don't know if the other two panelists want to react.
I can react at least to DAAD. So great to see you here. And I'm always advertising for your programs. But maybe the question, why is Chinese interest not so high? I would say because we have contradictory experiences, right? I would say I'm kind of flooded with applications from Chinese, but usually if you raise the issue where they are supporting schemes from Germany, then they would say, no, there's enough Chinese funding. So they would go for the China Scholarship Council usually. And I guess this is simply because they are more familiar with that. And that's maybe an important aspect to explain this opposite perspectives. And maybe two other aspects, this reduced interest in China studies, I think is as well related to a more general trend I see. So with regard to area studies in general. So it's not only the interest in China or in Asia is reduced. We see that at least in Germany, in other areas, studies like Latin America or Africa as well. And the other aspect, the research from abroad we were talking about as a new pattern of China studies, I think is as well very much related to the global presence of China. So it makes sense to look on the different aspects of China's engagement in other parts of the world. So maybe that's.
Thank you. In three things to react to. The first one on the Russia question, not our domain per se from EuroHub4, so I'll take my hat off to answer that. But what I said earlier about convenience being what drives what China does, what the CCP does. Probably there is a calculation there that it's better to keep this going, that it's better to preserve the relations with Russia. It's an alliance, it's an unholy alliance indeed. It's more an alliance of convenience than an ideological alliance, the one between China and Russia. But they have a very strong common enemy, and the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And had China thought that it was convenient for them to end the war in Ukraine, they would have already intervened quite strongly long ago. So it seems clear that that doesn't seem to be the case. And if you look at the press releases that followed the latest, I don't know, 5 EU-China summits, what you will see is like 80% of them are about Ukraine, and then 20% on the rest. So it has been a constant message from the EU. It has clearly not been heard. You asked the $1 million question about how do we improve the conditions for engagement with China. From where we stand, it's not a matter of engagement, but it's a matter of impact. So how do we actually improve? How do we change? How do we improve the human rights situation? As a human rights NGO, that's my. I don't want to punish China. I want to improve the human rights situation in China, the freedoms of the people, and it's hard to tell what will work. It's easy to tell what hasn't. So hesitation, fear of retaliation, barking but not biting, division among the member states, continuing with this human rights dialogue between the EU and China, which I think we have like 50 iterations of. Not one good thing that you can mention that came out of it over the 50 iterations. So it's indeed, is it a matter of process or is it a matter of impact? Do we think that repeating the same thing for 50 other times will give us to a different result? Or do we have enough evidence to prove that it doesn't work? But then, what's the alternative? And we would argue that there are non-verbal forms of dialogue. One such thing was the sanctions. The EU has a lot of tools, which were already mentioned earlier. They are there, a bit as a threat. They're not really used. Again, there is a zero variation, plus the divisions among member states that do not make it very feasible to use. What we would really need is to drop the unanimity rule in foreign policy. Unfortunately, it takes unanimity to drop unanimity, and many member states have an interest in not getting there. And the last thing I want to say, to go back to the semi-idle angle, which is to me key, and I think it's being underestimated massively if we take a longer term approach to China, is that we should also lead by example. When I say we, I do not only mean Europe, but if you will, the West. And until a couple of years back, we were still going around in Geneva or elsewhere and saying that China is the biggest threat to multilateralism, to a rules-based world order. If we look at today, which country has sanctioned the International Criminal Court? Which country has withdrawn from the Human Rights Council? And which country has stayed in those institutions? So it's becoming harder to defend any kind of claim of moral superiority of the West, even though we totally know that when you look at this at civil and political rights situation, it's not comparable in the slightest. Of course, they're freer. Maybe this very debate could not even happen in China. I would probably be in jail if I was in China, maybe other people here. So we know that there is a massive difference, but the perception and the match that is being played on the social media, in international politics, in multilateral fora, in the global south, is one where we point the finger at the West and we say, look, they are like us, they are worse than us. They are only words about human rights, which is not true. The EU does a lot when it comes to human rights. But this kind of narrative can be very damaging in the long term, and indeed lead us eventually to a race to the bottom that is really not in everyone's interest, and we should be very much afraid of.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think we're running out of time, but we do have a comment here. Yeah.
For me to contextualize. The microphone. Yeah. Can you hear me? If I can speak up. I just would like to contextualize the information that I've been hearing during the panel by asking a very simple question that's not going to take a lot of time. When have you been to China, and how many times have you been to China, and do you speak the language? Just for me to contextualize the information for everybody, actually. Yeah. Thank you. For the panelists, yeah, I know, of course, James, you went to Shenzhen last year, and probably many, many times. Yeah.
Yeah, I studied Chinese at Shandong University in 1980s and Edinburgh University. And then I lived in China for, I think, 16 years. And then I lived in Taiwan for 2 years, Hong Kong for 3 years. I speak Chinese.
My Chinese, to be honest, is not that great, but I did live in China for 3 years. I worked at 2 Chinese universities. I worked at the University of Chinese Academy of Sciences in Beijing for 5 semesters.
When did you go to China last time?
I just was there in the summer, just right now. I just came back.
Yeah, I studied at Guangzhou Sun Yat-sen University. Of course, I'm speaking the language, and I'm constantly going since 20 years to China every year, 7 times. And the only break, unfortunately, was between the pandemic.
It's been 6 years. Pandemic 2019, so 6 years you haven't been?
No, I have been last year, I have been this year, after the pandemic. I just said between my last visit of China was in December 2019, and then after the pandemic, I could, in July 23, I could go back.
Thank you. And I'm absolutely not embarrassed to say that I have not been to China, as I've not been to many of the countries that we work on, but I do rely on the amazing expertise of colleagues who have been, who know China inside out, who has done a lot of work there. And I'm quite familiar as well with the methodology of my organization, and the reliability of Human Rights Watch is actually built on the fact that we do have a very strong methodology. It is a nightmare to write a dispatch at 400 words. I cannot imagine what it must be to write a whole report on Human Rights Watch. So what I relay here is the message from my colleagues who know China very well and who are from China, some of them as well.
Okay, any final comments or thoughts? We actually have run out of time, so perhaps let's continue the conversation over the coffee. We have 30 minutes coffee break, networking break. So let's continue the conversation there. And then we have the next panel back at 11:40. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you to all the panelists.
No, it's always the very difficult moment when you have to stop talking during the coffee break and move into the panel. But in reality, the sooner we start, the sooner we have a longer break for lunch. So in this context, it's not as bad. Unfortunately, we still miss the 3rd panelist, but I hope she'll join us soon. And anyhow, we'll start, and then we'll continue when we have the 3rd panelist with us. I'm Marcin Grabowski from the Jagiellonian University Center for International Studies and Development, and I have a pleasure to talk to lead this panel, head this panel that is actually composed of great experts on China, enriching our knowledge. And again, they will talk briefly 7-8 minutes each to introduce the challenges we have with cooperation with China in the new era. During the previous panel, we were considering the new era is connected with changing China. First, becoming more important in technological competition. That is still the area where the West, let's call it collectively, prevails, or at least has impression to prevail. That can be discussed, having heard what was debated before. But at the same time, the new era is defined by a really surprising behavior of the current leader of the global system, which is the United States and its president Donald Trump. Yeah? So the European Union is somehow stuck between the loyalty to the United States, behaving more like enemy sometimes, or at least harsh competitor, and China, that is perceived as a competitor more than partner that we could collaborate. At the same time, we should build good relations in different areas with both the US and China, maybe build temporary coalitions, let's say geostrategically, geoeconomically, if I can use this expression. And these are the areas we could discuss here, having in mind different dimensions. We're happy to have, as I said, three magnificent experts, Professor Jia from the Chatham House. She's Senior Research Fellow specializing in Chinese foreign policy, Chinese economic policy, and Ms. Nienke Buisman, that's heading the unit for Asia Pacific, Africa, and the Middle East within Directorate for Research and Innovation at the European Commission. She's the Deputy Director. And I think we can start with in this order. So, Yuqi, the floor is yours for 7-8 minutes. And as I think the most important, interesting part will be discussing, having heard the questions of the audience, the experts at the audience. So, Yuqi.
Okay, thank you, Martin. I hope you can all hear me. Is the microphone working or not? No. Okay, obviously that's not working. Let me find this one. Now you can hear me better. Okay. Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Really delighted to be here and to share some of my thoughts regarding how to engage with China, and also share some of my personal experience on my recent trips to China in the past year or two or so. Now, really, let me to start with, I did remember very clearly in the previous session, one of the member of the audience asked me the question that regarding whether China is a monolithic entity or is non-monolithic entity. Now, let me go back to that question to start with my remark in here. Firstly, I think the clear answer in here that China is not a monolithic entity, even though you do have one single leader who that seemingly seems to decide almost everything. But when it comes to certain economic policy decision-making, when it comes to crucial issues regarding export control, many things that you're all concerned about, is actually a tug of war among different ministries. So the point number one is this is not monolithic. So what this will lead to us? And this leads to us into how should we engage with China effectively. Now, we seem to be taken by the media report in here, oh, China's introducing this, China's introducing that new policy. But which department actually exactly introducing those policy and getting what result? Now, let me give an example of recent US-China trade negotiation. Now, in the previous round, in the Trump first term, the trade negotiation seems to take place between the Chinese Vice Premier Liu He and also with his fellow colleagues from Ministry of Finance that determine the exchange rate issues, that determine the agricultural purchase issues. That seems to be the priority during the first round of trade negotiation. But instead, I think when they come to the second of the trade negotiation and the Trump 2, and if we're really judging from the composition of the Chinese members, senior members of the negotiation team, and you notice a quite significant influence in here. That is to say, it is no longer the Ministry of Finance that call the shot and try to decide exchange rate, try to decide tariff, but instead it's the Ministry of Commerce that try to decide the issues on critical minerals and on export control, and also in terms of tariffs and quota, and then hence their status obviously raising with that. So in this case, and if we were to try to find out what is going on and what would the view of the Chinese government when it comes to the trade negotiation, and perhaps we have to change a different department, try to understand. So a small example to show you that Beijing is not monolithic, firstly. Secondly, the policy that come out from Beijing, and in many occasions, the Politburo, which is the most senior decision-making body of the Chinese Communist Party, the team of 24, without a single woman. So just to be clear in here, the use of one in the past, but not for this round. The team of 24 deciding the big brush stroke, gigantic titles. So I give example, the Belt and Road Initiative. So the Belt and Road Initiative has been launched back to 13 years ago, and obviously attract enormous criticisms. And also, the rest of the world depends on where you're sitting geographically, taking very different views towards the Belt and Road Initiative. But where all got started, it started was from a very much blue sky talking and try to build a sense of connectivity. So it's entirely up to different departments within the central administration. It entirely depends on the different provinces that actually border with neighboring countries and to decide what are the priorities of the Belt and Road Initiative that actually have to do. And inevitably, that actually causes some sense of confrontation and clashes between the central government and the vis-a-vis provincial government. So at the end of the day, whatever the policy document that comes at the end being published through the Chinese official channel, it becomes a game and product of the lowest common denominator. So that is very similar to, I believe, for the policy making with the European Union and also, for example, with the UK, with the British government as well. So I think that sense of seeking common denominator and looking for what is actually the key players within this decision making is absolutely essential, I think, to understand China and also to engage with China. It's very easy and it's very almost too simplistic to say, oh, it's China, but which part of China are we stick with here? And which part of China are we dealing with? So that's lesson number one I've learned in the past few years throughout doing researches, but also throughout doing by interviewing, by talking to people within Beijing and within various provinces and cities. Now, the second lessons I've been taken is not my own lesson. It's actually the lessons from senior US policymakers and the Trump administration and also and the Obama administration. So recently I went to Sweden, did a track-to dialogue between United States and China. And then with some quite senior US delegations present, I mean, what do I mean by senior? 70 of state level. And the person told me, when we engage with the Chinese, and particularly the Chinese policymakers, we need to show utmost respect and also try to understand their point of view. And then beyond that, there's no way we can actually have a candid conversation. So showing to a certain extent a sense of respect toward your counterpart. And again, I think that's absolutely essential. We link back to what James said earlier, making connections and building personal trust. And this is something absolutely essential. And when you're speaking with Chinese, so I would wonder if the United States able to do that, and surely the Europeans could be able to do that as well. However, I think the perception that some part of the European countries, only some parts, yeah, not the total parts of the European Union, but some part of European countries left the impression that seems to be come within China with certain views that it would prefer to change the currency. And I think judging from the dialogues we have so far and judging from the various experiences and various sectoral dialogues we have so far, that did not work. That did not go down very well with Beijing. So nowadays, I think not just nowadays, but even in the past 5 years or so, the senior policymakers in Beijing view its relationship with European Union, many of them through the lenses of the United States. Wonder whether the European Union would be as a counterbalance against the United States with China or something else. And I think Beijing will continue to do so and will continue to view Europeans through the lenses of the United States. So if the countries do not receive that sense of respect from the Europeans, I'm surely would expecting a continuous conversation between Beijing and Washington, but not necessarily between Beijing, Brussels, and various other member states. So that's the second point of being taken. Now, the third one, I'd like to share my personal story regarding engagement within China. Back a few months ago, and I received a phone call from one of the ministries within China because they read some of my paper on China-India relations. And the minister wanted to have a discussion with me. I said, fine. But then I said, can I just go and meet the minister and have a discussion? They said, no, you can't. Firstly, you need to handle a chapter of your PhD. And secondly, you need to give me all your recent published articles, whether it's on Financial Times, whether it's on Project Syndicate. You need to give me all your public works. And then we have to make assessment whether you'll be able to meet this minister or not. And then let him meet the minister. So that's the personal experience you have. And that is to say, the hustle to get to the end is far messy and far more chaotic than actually you landed at the minister's office and having that conversation directly, that seems to be far more rewarding. So that is the China for you. And once you open one door, and there's millions of other doors you have to wait to be open, and you probably will get even more confused.
Thank you, Eugene. That was really interesting, inspiring intervention for the discussion. Let me now invite Ms. Ninga Huisman to share her thoughts, her initial comments to our debate.
Thank you. Thank you very much to the moderator and the previous speaker as well. Let me first say that I'm not an expert on China. I mean, you can see from my title, I cover a big part of the world in nature research and innovation. And so we collaborate with many partners in the world, and of course, China is an important partner in my portfolio. So I also need some notes to be able to engage with you. But what I would like to do today is to share with you a little bit from the EU's perspective, from the Commission perspective, how we see the challenges, how we have evolved our policy in the last years, what from experience we believe works and doesn't work. And hopefully through this, you'll get some practical takeaways as well. As you said, technology is really at the center of geopolitics. We see that on a daily basis, and in terms of China-EU collaboration, we still call it in science and technology. We see on the one hand, China, since many years, has a very strong emphasis on science and technology in terms of spending. It has it's spending more on R&D as the EU is spending on R&D, and the policy, as we see it from the EU perspective, is very much geared towards technology self-reliance, becoming #1 in the world in STI by 2050. On the European side, I think we have woken up a little bit over the last periods. Research and innovation is increasingly relevant for our competitiveness, security, but also preservation of democratic values. You have seen in the current guidelines of the current college led by President von der Leyen that research and investment in research and innovation is really taking center stage. Before the summer, we have been making proposals for the next budgetary cycle and investment in research and innovation, in addition to a new competitiveness fund. So the new Horizon Europe program proposal is to double. It really takes center stage in our competitiveness agenda. At the same time, Europe has been refocusing and bolster its economic security and resilience. And economic security, the economic security strategy of the EU focuses on promoting. So here the first signs are needing to invest more in research and innovation, also in the European Union. Secondly, partners, so keeping also science and research open as possible as we can, because this is the DNA of science. We can only get the best results if we collaborate internationally. And thirdly, the protect. That while we want to keep science open, we also need to keep it secure and safe. And in certain instances, maybe doing the science on our own, but preferably as little as possible. So in terms of our collaboration on STI with China, we have been focusing since 2019. We have held discussions with the Chinese government, with the Ministry of Science and Technology, on a joint roadmap for the future of EU-China cooperation in science, technology, and innovation, where we have set or we try to agree on a set of framework conditions, both in research and innovation, to actually create in the future more balanced and mutually beneficial cooperation. We have been able to agree on all of the research framework conditions, for example, in gender equality in research, open science, etc. But we have been much less successful in discussing and agreeing on framework conditions in the space of innovation, such as IP enforcement, for example. And this has, as I said, we started in 2019, and now we're really at a stage to see, okay, how do we pursue this? At the same time, so on our side, and I will say a little bit more about this. So we have also recalibrated because we haven't really been able to agree with China on the framework conditions. We have also recalibrated Horizon Europe in terms of access. At the same time, we also still see that scientific collaborations between universities in the EU and in China are rising in certain areas, such as AI, big data. Co-publications have grown more than tenfold since 2011, and this is data from a sister project, Reconnect China reports. So yeah, how have we actually adopted our policy? As I said, we want to keep the international cooperation open, but also secure and safe at the same time. So and this is the approach that we have been taken so far. So apart from discussing or trying to discuss with our stakeholders in China the roadmap, we still are looking at areas where we can continue to collaborate. And so we have invested from Horizon Europe together with the Ministry of Science and Technology quite heavily in collaborative research in the areas, for example, as climate change and biodiversity, as we call it, the flagship on climate change and biodiversity, as well as a flagship on food, agriculture, and biodiversity. So we're not, we believe that there are still areas in which the EU and China should collaborate in science and technology, and we will continue to invest in those areas from Horizon Europe. At the same time, we have been focusing on how we can make the research cooperation more secure, not being successful in agreeing on framework conditions. We have seen ourselves also obliged to introduce certain safeguards in Horizon Europe, whereby in certain research areas, mostly in the critical technology, we have decided to close the program, as well as those areas that are closest to the market. So we call those innovation actions. They are also no longer open for collaboration until we one day may find agreement on this roadmap, and we continue to say that we are open to discussing this. Of course, the European Union is not only the Commission. We're made of the Commission and the almost 27 member states. Research is a shared competence in the European Union, and most of the investments are actually made by the member states. So we're also working very closely with the member states to have, let's say, an aligned or trying to align our approach. First, in the area of research security. Last year, we, with the Council, with the Member States, we adopted a Council recommendation on research security that is really setting out joint definition. How can we do risk assessment? How can you reflect before engaging? What questions does a researcher, university, member state need to ask itself before engaging in the collaboration? I think it's important to underline that research security is state agnostic. So we are not focusing on one country or the other, but in general, in terms of international cooperation, because of this tension in the geopolitics, we are inviting everyone to ask questions before you engage in a certain relationship. So we are focusing on raising awareness, but also building the capacity and making sure that in a couple of years there's a level playing field in the EU, because at the moment there's quite a big difference between the member states. So what works? I mean, we see that this more balanced approach, safety or security, hand in hand with openness, works in areas where there's mutual interest for collaboration, and where actually the framework conditions are right. So I mentioned the examples of the flagship in climate change and biodiversity, as well as in food and agriculture. And these global challenges are indeed common ground to collaboration, and we will continue to invest in this. What also works are projects like this one. We have been investing from Horizon Europe since the beginning of the program 21 in enhancing evidence, enhancing independent EU knowledge on China, creating expert networks, networking and the China centers of expertise in the EU. This also, I think, enriches the debate and informs us as policymakers in our policy decisions, and we will continue. We see that it's working. It's bringing added value also to the Commission, and we will continue to invest in this going forward. What also works, we see progress in our collaboration with the member states. When we started 5-6 years ago, let's say the relations and the discussions that the Commission had with China and that separate member states had with China in the area of science and technology were rather disconnected. Through the creation of our EU Knowledge Network on China, we are really on a monthly basis discussing with the member states how is it going with the roadmap, where are you investing in which research fields, and we see from the results from the joint calls that member states are doing that the Commission and the member states are more and more aligned in our approach towards collaboration with China. What doesn't work, in our view, as I said, the collaboration we used to have on higher tech actions close to the markets, we have really linked the absence of progress in our negotiations on the roadmap and the framework conditions on innovations to access to the program. So here we are unable to for a long time, we were even unable to discuss. We didn't have any meetings. I have to say that since the beginning of the end of 24, now in 25, this has changed. There are much more openness on the side of the Ministry of MOST to actually sit around the table and discuss. So that we're very happy to see, but for the moment it doesn't lead to any progress. So we are keeping this part of Horizon Europe closed for collaboration as long as we don't see any progress there. Structural imbalances remain, as I said, on IPR enforcement, access to public procurement, standardization issues. Those are really the framework conditions that we're unable to agree on. So maybe some practical takeaways. We still believe that we need to go for targeted engagement, not closure. It really isn't in our interest to close entirely the collaboration. But we would like to continue at least to talk and try and understand differences. And we are taking a lot of time for this SDG research and innovation together with our colleagues in the Ministry of Science and Technology in China. We also very much believe that we need to keep research security and all the tools and guidance, risk assessments that we are putting in place, that we keep this state agnostic, that it's not directed to one country or the other, but that we are evaluating risks at different levels. So not only at the country level, but also the technology, if you want to collaborate with a certain partner, and the risk profile of the university or the research organization as such. And as we go forward, we will also be implementing this much more nuanced approach, much more risk-based approach in the next version of Horizon Europe. And we have recently proposed the new regulation. So I think this is, no. And lastly, as I said, we very much believe in investing in the evidence base, in the knowledge. Projects like the one gathering today, we will continue to invest in, because this is still very much needed in the European Union. So I think I'll leave it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was also really inspiring. I have a lot of questions by myself. Unfortunately, Ms. Gwen Song that started her journey towards Brussels this morning, as far as we realized couldn't reach us soon, and we didn't know what happened in between. But whenever we know, we'll let you know. Hopefully she'll be able to join us. But let's now move to the Q&A round. Let's open floor for brief comments and questions. So let's have maybe 2-3 questions at the moment in the first round and continue later. Yeah, Sebastian.
So thank you for the very interesting talk. My question is to our second speaker, that so what is the criteria actually of cooperation with China, especially in sensitive fields like technology? To what extent is it desirable, for example, to cooperate with Chinese institutions? Also with Chinese state-sponsored institutions in cultural fields, let's say the Confucius Institute or whatever it is called now. I think it was reorganized in the last years. So what can you say about this? Like, what are the limits of cooperation from your institution's perspective? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, that was a question. And please introduce yourself before asking question.
Hi, thank you to both the panelists. My name is Julian. I'm a PhD student at Charles University in Prague, Czechia. The first question is for the first panelist, and I'm curious in terms of, because I'm looking, I've studied abroad in China before, but that was before the pandemic, and I'm curious in terms of what sort of practical or concrete steps can be taken by like young scholars or emerging scholars to try to sort of build connections with China to be able to undertake research stays and travel productively in China again. And then this connects then to the second question, where like as Professor Garlick had mentioned this morning, there's a lot of challenges right now in Czech academia about studying China. I'm one of only 2 PhD students at my faculty who researches China, and we face a lot of resistance. And I'm curious, because you mentioned that Horizon will continue to support like projects like this. Like, how is also to what extent is the EU supportive of research to understand Chinese politics, society, governance, and including supporting member states in ensuring that their academic systems continue to support such research as well?
Thank you. I think Gregor was next.
Thank you very much, Gregor Stetsmaris. I want to ask you a much broader question, if I may, related to the topic that we're tackling today. How do we engage with China in the new era? Which is, what strategic and realistic strategic objectives do you actually see in the engagement with China right now? Because it does seem that we're in this situation where there was quite a lot of hope in different corners of Europe in the context of Trump potentially changing the dynamic. This obviously has not been the case. It does seem that from Beijing's perspective, this was more of an Chinese leadership's assessment of geopolitical trends has been correct. The path taken for comprehensive national security and the securitization was correct. There is no new offer towards Europe, apart from some symbolic gestures, and there seems to be more pressure. At the same time, if we take a look at the deliverables of the different summits and engagements, something that Joanna talked about today in the morning, geographical indicators, there are challenges with implementation. There were Earth's alert system that was agreed now. It does seem that less than 25% of the licensing requests that are monitored by the EU CCC, the European Union Chamber of Commerce in China, go through. There seems to be simply not really that much coming of engagement. And to be fully transparent, I'm not advocating for limiting the engagement. I think it's important that we talk to one another, because this is still a mechanism for us to manage the risks, manage the tensions, try to find solutions, but it does seem that it's not really necessarily delivering. So in that context, and that's something that was mentioned today, and I would want to put pressure on this point, I wonder if at this stage, the core of our China policy shouldn't be outside of our relationship with China, because there is simply as much as we can achieve within that relationship in terms of strategic objectives. So this is where my question comes to you. What strategic goals would you set for Europe in its engagement with China? What realistically we can achieve? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I just have a rather detailed question, if I may. You mentioned standardization discussions not going ahead. Could you explain a little bit why that is the case? What's the impediment on the standardization issue? And is it affecting telecom standardization? For instance, I've noticed that the ITU, there's also no progress at all towards arriving at a 6G standard or a 5.5G telecom standard. So any elaboration you could give us on what the problem is on standardization discussions with China, please.
Thank you. Let me ask the panelists to answer briefly, and then we'll move to the second round. I think that's...
Just to start with the PhD candidates' point of view, like engaging with China and realistically in terms of scholar works and things. I think probably because what is in China, the scholarly works and also think tank fields, think tank community is also very confusing these days itself. Whether they serve as PR agency, whether they actually realistically serve as academic institution, that something needs to be distinguished. So for junior scholar, it would be better to engage more with the academic institutions and less so towards those PR agencies that clearly what they're trying to do is trying to present a certain narrative, something that perhaps we all have some doubt about. So I think that's the lesson number one, try to find the right institution to engage with. Now, secondly, I think there's also to do the fact that when you come to China, there's a certain pre-existing judgment that you already have in your home country. And when you go there and you can compare whether your previous judgment or right or wrong with open eyes. Do not necessarily just convince that what you have believed previously, perhaps that makes sense. And when you arrive in China and you realize, this is very different from what I believed previously. Maybe I was right and this one was wrong. So with open eyes, I think these are the two key things for any junior researchers who want to carry China works. And by the way, it's a 24-hour 7 work for this. It's a lifetime commitment. It's not something you do it for hobby. So that's just speaking from own personal experience. You might end up reading some really nitty-gritty policy document that has very long sentences and terms and isms you would not be able to understand. It takes you decades to try to work out what exactly the party tried to say. So that's my, even myself, by being a native speaker, and I still sometimes struggle, and I hardly understand the recent tuition magazine published on those core articles written by the senior politicians in China. I hardly understand it, and I just have to, even using my own mental translation by itself. James, on your question on standardization, maybe I can chip in here, something which I've worked with as well. I think on standardization, it is not just a technology issue itself, but it's an issue of narrative power, something that Beijing is extremely keen to project in the recent years, not just within the part of non-Western world, but equally Beijing felt they want to project this into the Western world too, because the standardization is a process of depending on how large the end consumers you have. The larger end consumers you have, and the more likely that standard will become a default standard. So I think that's the concern from Europeans' end. They would not prefer to having the Chinese standard to become the default standard. So by effectively reducing the numbers of the end consumers and end customer usage.
Thank you very much. Maybe picking up on your last answer on the standardization. I mean, I'm not an expert, but what we see and what we're discussing. So I agree with your analysis, and this is what we see in the discussions on the roadmap as well. We are on the European side giving access to our standardization bodies, for example. But these are not reciprocally open on the Chinese side for Europeans, and this is what we're asking for. So on the criteria, for the moment, our criteria are, as I said, a bit, linked to TRL level. So we have said, because there is an absolute imbalance in the level playing field on the innovation space, we are not collaborating with China in projects above TRL level 5, for example. And all the basic research we have kept open, and we are pushing to have projects locally in the area of global challenges. I mean, one of the few deliverables that came out of the summit was a declaration on climate change, for example, and we will continue to invest also in research and collaborative research in this area, because it's a small space where we are still able to have a public declaration. As I try to explain also what we want to do, I mean, our programs are 7-year based, and we always set out the rules in the regulation, and this is not really possible to change in the 7-year period. So we know that going forward, we need to have a much more nuanced and risk-based approach, so not excluding entire countries, but look at, okay, which universities, which research institutes in China, for example, can we collaborate with what is the risk level in which areas of research. So this more nuanced approach will be introduced in the future program, which will also allow us to be less, let's say, black and white, perhaps on the research areas we collaborate on. Second question was on I said we will continue to invest in projects like this, but the sister projects are, for example, Reconnect and Work. So really investing in doing research on Chinese politics, Chinese economics, culture. We truly believe that we need to invest in this in Europe, independent knowledge on China in Europe, building, continuing, helping, supporting universities, China centers of expertise on China to continue to do research, to also stimulate younger people to still study, China studies. It's interesting to see. I had a publication in my department for the collaboration with China, and I had lots of applicants. And we were asking for knowledge of the Chinese language and China studies. And there's a certain generation that was applying. They're now in their 30, 35, something like this. So there were lots of applicants, but not younger. So we need to continue to invest in this because we really see that this is reducing in EU, and this is what we will aim to do. So I think that's yeah. So what is realistically possible? I think the EU is still, reflecting on this at the moment. You don't really see a lot of decisions. We are in this space where there's a lot of volatility on the US side, on Chinese side, and even internally in the EU. So we are reflecting on what move to make. But we continue to believe indeed in discussing, and this is why we wanted the summits to take place, despite the absence of very many deliverables. The space for discussion needs to happen. So we will in science based. The only realistic thing I see for the moment is that we still collaborate in certain basic research areas in global challenges, but not much more for the time being. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me open the floor for the second round of questions or comments. Okay, yeah. You have a question there. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you. I'm Yang Li from Institute of China-Europe Studies based in Brussels. So I have a question to Dr. Yu Jie about, you just said that you had difficulties, in reading Chinese, even as a native speaker. I think sometimes, I have the same problem that when I read, those lengthy documents, the papers, I have to read between the lines. Maybe sometimes the very complicated background or context are involved. So, but in your sense, how does that problem affect the communication or the effectiveness of the communication between Europe and China? And how to narrow that knowledge gap? Do you have any idea? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Claudia.
Thanks. I have a question to the first panelist as well. You said that you insisted on the fact that China is not a monolith, and indeed there are various parts of the apparatus that one should talk to in order to pursue different goals. How has Xi Jinping's stronger grip on power affected that assumption? And two, does that really apply to a sensitive topic like personal freedoms, human rights, etc., or we do have a monolith on that angle? How would you approach that?
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you. I am not from China Studies, and I'm from actually business school, ESCP Business School. So my main background is called cultural leadership. My question is related to a lot of my education experience of teaching European students, and we spent lots of time building the international collaborations with top universities in China. And as the panelists noticed as well, Ms. Neke, you noticed as well, and also in the morning discussions, less young people are less willing and more intimidated, actually. When I talk to my students who I get to really talk at very close distance, they feel intimidated to go to China for perhaps a bit inflated reasons. What do you think we should do, in order to help maintain the bridge, to keep the dialogue going? What would an 18, 17-year-old, 19-year-old be thinking if he or she heard some of the conversations that we had in this room? Thank you.
Thank you. To see others, maybe I'll use the opportunity to ask the fourth question, directing it especially to Ms. Huisman and referring to the Next Horizon Europe project that you've mentioned. That was great. Will have its allocation doubled. That is also somehow concurring with the Gregor's questions on strategy. Because competitive edge that we could keep versus US and China must be based on certain strategic priorities. For the moment, Horizon is quite strictly regulated program. Yeah, so the topics are predefined by the EC, and then the research consortia are competing to do research where it is defined. There's a difference in ERC where you still relatively free in selecting your research topics. In order to build innovation, you cannot operate in such a regulated area, yeah, because innovation is what you don't know at this moment. Chinese model, of course, is more regulated. They have their 5-year plans and the areas they want to compete. US is perceived as more liberal, which is not always the truth. Yeah, but let's say this is the issue. Shall we go into further regulation? And as to my knowledge, EC was considering regulate or restrict the research further. Even in ERC, that was the debate I've heard. I'm not sure whether it's true. This is one part of my question. Or we shall open it, not only increase the allocation, but also open it to be more innovative. Yeah, so put more money into non-regulated areas for researchers to build, to find out something that we don't know, because we don't know what's innovative in 10 years. Yeah, we define budget now, then we build the list of topics, and then we're not innovative any longer, because 10 years later it's not innovative, which is counterproductive to keep competitive edge. Yeah, so is there such a debate within EC, and how do you see it in connection with this trilateral competition, I would call it. So, also, you can also comment on this as an academic. Being back to Horizon Europe, because UK is back to Horizon. Thank you. Not sure whether there are other questions or comments. If not, let me just give the mic back to the panelists.
Thank you much. I think that question for the official here. Yeah, don't want to chew my words on Horizon. Regarding colonial question, that's a very straightforward one. I think any issues that link to the regime legitimacy, that would be very heavy-handedly decided to be the top leader. But if there are issues that is largely ranging from economic decision-making, and I think the room for competition among different departments are largely exists. So I think by looking to monolithism in here is that, yes, there are sensitive topics, but I think the majority of topics are not necessarily that entirely related to personal sensitivity. So hence, you do have a different ministries and also the provinces and try to work out what exactly they want to do and what would be mostly suitable for their own local conditions. So I think it's anything that connect to regime legitimacy. I think the first thing would be that'll be decided by the very top leaders. So that's the answer. Now, Okay. On Mr. Young's question, very good. And I give you very clear example. The very term that this is rise, the West is in decline. And I actually go back to all the archives, what Xi Jinping has been said in the past 5 years. I've not seen the exact word. So I don't know where the West is decline and the this is rising come from, firstly. So that's a mystery. And secondly, it was all associated with this following term to say the world is facing unseen changes in the last century, which someone believed that would imply the East is rising and the West is in decline. So that is the confusion. Then I think that would make international observer to taking the view that China have this global ambition to overtake United States and hence to capture this opportunity as what Beijing is doing right now. So that sense of loss in translation, and that led into certain ramifications, let's be clear. Another clear example in here is, again, the Future magazine, I mean, the end consumer, it is not for people like you and me and the researchers, fellow researchers in here, is actually a giving instruction to the lower level cadets and tell them what party you want to do. And we use it as a window to observe the changes in Chinese domestic politics. And we use it to treat it as a barometer as observing Chinese politics. And funny enough, I mean, I speak with financial institutions quite often, and many portfolio managers these days consider Future magazine, instead of Financial Times, sorry, James, instead of FT, is the must read if you want to invest in China and allocating asset within China. So that's to show you at the end of the day, yes, even something is almost inscrutable, and we just have to get over and try to read it and then hands the pen. I think we will have to endure for quite some time. Yeah.
There was also a question from the lady from business school on indeed confirming now that less young people are doing China studies, and when they go to China, there's perhaps more intimidation. So what can we do to still keep the dialogue open and make them go? Yeah, I think we need to, of course, well, I guess that if they study China studies, they're fully aware, but as an institution, prepare them well, and also have always know they know where to turn to in case of issues when they are in China. But they are also, I'm turning to my colleague Gaia, because Gaia, you studied China studies, and you have also studied in China. Maybe you have some advice afterwards you wish to give. But I'm also happy to. Yeah.
I think that for young students, for example, projects like this, initiatives like this.
Thanks. Are key to also pass the message that their expertise is valued in the EU. Because, for example, studying Chinese requires a lot of efforts. And then if you don't see these efforts repaid, also in the world of work, you are less incentivized for to put all that energy with the risk that then it will end up nowhere. So I think that this kind of initiatives the EU is carrying out, the fact of looking for expertise when we recruit staff, the recent China fellowship launched by DGID. So those are messages for young students that their expertise is valued.
Thank you. Turning to the question on Horizon Europe, first of all, just let me say that the text on the table right now is a proposal from the Commission, and we're now entering into a 1-2 year institutional process with the co-legislators, the Council and the Parliament, so it can still drastically change. But from the Commission perspective, we absolutely believe that this doubling of the budget is needed for our competitiveness as well as economic security. And how you spend it, that's indeed in the center of the debate right now. I'm not going to, I mean, of course, I'm presenting the Commission here. So we have made a proposal that is we believe, balanced. So on one hand, we still keep Pillar 1, a strong investment through the European Research Council, but also Marie Sklodowska, and this is completely bottom-up. It's not prescriptive research that we are funding. There's also a doubling, I think, if I remember well, of Pillar 3, so the European Innovation Council. And even there, we are proposing a DARPA-style program managers really helping to get certain innovations through. But Pillar 2 remains important. The collaborative research, you have seen in the proposal that now part of it is linked to the competitiveness fund. So it focuses on what the policymakers at the moment see as the priorities: clean tech, defense, etc., and then some other still windows more on social science, democracy, that is linked immediately to Horizon Europe. And there is indeed a big debate about the way we are preparing the work programs, the way the topics or the goals are being too descriptive, and that this should perhaps be less descriptive in the future. This is the aim to make even. I mean, there's a clear objective to keep the collaborative research, because we believe that is how we get to the best results. But there's also the intention to change the way we present the topics in the work program. And Commissioner Sarajeva is already wanting to start this at the moment. So we still have one work program to go, 26-27, where we have already been asked to drastically reduce the number of pages. So that means the topics will have to be less prescriptive. I leave it at that. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Sean.
Maybe I'll do it without a microphone. I really don't think there's a decline in interest in students in China. It's just shifted, right? So I taught my first class on Chinese politics in a politics department in 1987, and I had 8 students. I taught my last class on Chinese politics 2 years ago, and I had 103. And it's a shifting ecosystem of interest in China. It's no longer the China study routes. Students aren't applying to universities aged 16, 17, 18 to do these 4-year area studies program. They're interested in studying China as part of their more general studies in geography or history or politics or whatever it is. And I don't think the ecosystem of thinking about training the next generation of China specialists has caught up with this shift. There's that incredible knowledge, but then where does it go? So they don't start by an interest in China or an interest in language or in culture or whatever. They start because they're interested in history, politics, whatever it is. Then they get that interest in China, and then where do they go? And I think certainly at university level, we're probably not doing the right thing in providing those opportunities once they've got their disciplinary degree to then go on and do something else in terms of learning language, maybe 2-3-year MA programs in collaboration with Chinese universities. So the interest is 100% there. It is much bigger than any of the 40 years that I've been going to China and studying China. It's how we sort of harness and what we do with it. And I think there are 2 sort of biggest problems long term as well. One is PhD funding, right? It's just not there. And okay, this might be a member state responsibility, but it's just not there. And longer PhD programs, including perhaps 2 years learning the language before you start. The second is funding to undertake small ad hoc research trips, perhaps the sort of things you're talking about as a PhD student, because we had that EU-China higher education cooperation program for 10 years, which might have had its problems, right? But it facilitated a huge amount of exchanges, and that's gone. And most universities now are cutting back on money. So the only funding really often to go to China is projects like this, if you're lucky enough, or if you're invited by the Chinese side and the Chinese side pays for you. So I think we need to be a bit more flexible in thinking about the whole ecosystem of how China is studied and accept that it's changing, it's shifting. If you go to the Asian Studies Conference in the States every year, it's full of American professors of Asian history complaining that they've got more students, right? Whereas the politics departments are also full. We have next year, in the first year of the politics department at Warwick University, 1,000 students taking the compulsory first year degree. A quarter of those, I bet you, would want to do something on China if it was possible to do. We have to really fundamentally change the way we think about how China studies is studied, work, and the mechanisms for progression through the education system onto something else, including perhaps working in the European Commission.
Perfect, thank you. Yuja?
Yeah. Well, Sean is changing. Sean is speaking with Europe is changing, China is changing. By the way, I was on his class 20 years ago, so I still vividly remember how wonderful that was. Advertising for him. I think China itself is also changing. So from my recent trip, what I've gathered is that the government actually scaled back the study of a social science, but instead giving a much stronger emphasis towards science, and exactly like where the Research and Innovation Fund goes. And I invite you to all examining China's public national budget this year, published on the 5th of March, 2025. You see every single item that has been increased in line with inflation, with the notable exception on Research and Innovation Fund that has increased 12.9% beyond inflation. So that really shows where the country wants to put its own competitiveness, where it goes. It goes on this drive of technology self-reliance. It goes through this drive of what if the United States could cut off on China on semiconductor supply and what China would do. So I think that's the national champion, that's the way how they get the resources and somehow at the expenses of having a more well-developed social science sector. So in a way, I think it's also hard for many scholars, international scholars who want to study on China, partly because China itself on that sector is shrinking.
Thank you, Grzegorz.
Thank you. If I can, with a very quick point, building up on Sean's point about the need for this structure, this is also something that we looked at as part of dealing with our research in China funded research. So thank you once again for the Horizon funding for that as part of our resilience audit. And resources are extremely tight currently. Simply, no one is willing to invest considerably in resilience building measures. It's always being done on a budget, trying to go around it. One of the ways, to my mind, how we could create space for young people with the China capacity entering the workforce. Again, it would be great if businesses simply expand, of course, the positions that require Chinese language, Chinese background. This is hard to facilitate. But in terms of governmental positions, this is something where you can create basically overnight a pool of posts that are going to be potentially filled by people with a specific expertise at relatively no additional cost. So this, to my mind, would also work. It would be a win-win direction in the sense of also increasing the level of China knowledge in the administrations and the China background. So I think there are many ways in which we can work on things. It's just that this requires political will and the attention at the time when still, I think we're primarily thinking in Europe right now in terms of political priorities. Now, US, defense, Russia, China is a little bit lower on the agenda as of now, I feel. And this is something that we're, I think, all working as a community in terms of putting China really at the center of some of the discussions that are unfolding. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. And as we are running out of time, let me just remind you what you basically know, that in the 80s, we were just waiting for Japan to be the global leader, absolutely outclassing the US. And the US, due to its flexibility, its structure, surge of migrants, specific innovation policy, won this competition extremely. This is what we can expect now in the US-China competition, and that's the topic for lunch. I guess we don't necessarily need to discuss it now because we don't have time, but think about it, but also the risks of falling China can bring to the global system, not rising, the falling China can bring to the international system. Let me now ask you to put hands together to thank our panelists for their marvelous comments. and invite Nicholas.
I will take over, Martin. I'm going to grab Nienke before she leaves. She's the only external author, so you get a little gift, a little speaker. No, you get the pat on your back. So thank you for a very inspiring discussion. We still have no news from Gwen, so she is either on a plane or whatever she is, but hopefully she will join us. First of all, I would like to thank, of course, the European Union and the Horizon Project for funding this. This has been very valuable. I would also like to thank, of course, the audience. I mean, the audience makes all the difference. But also, of course, Saban and his team for making it happen. And I find this discussion really interesting. But as most interesting discussions, we have more questions than answers. So, but for me, it's how do we engage with China in the new era? Well, there is, Sean was talking about Plan B, of course, and we're more and more dealing with what China is doing rather to understand China. And I think that we need to get back to a lot of extent with Plan A. It's interesting that Sean also mentioned the political science and, they collect more of the Chinese flows. My daughter actually is doing exactly that. She joined the political science department uni, and she's now going to take up Chinese. The problem is, in her class, none of the students will go to China. They will travel to Taiwan. And I know this is the case in the Czech Republic as well, not in the case in the UK, as I understand it from Sean. So we have slightly different challenge. But something has happened. And of course, we have the pandemic. Before the pandemic, and I'm going to be, ICP has been engaging with the PLA, the Communist Party, government institutions since late 90s. So we had every year, we had 4 PLA officers coming over to us. That changed, of course, in the pandemic. Partly, of course, because China has changed, and partly because ICP has a Taiwan center, which is not appreciated by the Chinese government. But that's not necessarily a problem for the government, I do have to say. It's becoming more complicated to deal with it. We shut down our office in Beijing in 2016, because it was more, our space of maneuver changed, if you put it that way. So China has changed, it's more complicated, but I think also the European Union has changed and the individual governments, because the engagement we had with government institutions is not possible anymore. We don't get any funding. So dealing with the People's Liberation Army is today virtually impossible. And this is a challenge because we need that connection, we need that understanding. And Anja was talking about the moral challenge that we're facing. It's a sort of a Berührungsangst with China. And I understand that, and I see the challenge, but at the same time, we need to increase that. And there are restricted areas, absolutely. And I don't think we can always see eye to eye in all the issues, and we shouldn't, let's be honest. There are areas where we should be restricted, and so is China. Let's refrain that China has a very clear legislation about sensitive and critical areas. Fair enough, Europe should have the same. But there are also areas where we do collaborate well, and nothing else. Free trade, at least verbally, we all agree about free trade. Despite the protectionism of Europe, despite the lack of level playing field in China, at least we do have the same communication. So how do we adapt to these changes? Well, not really that well. We need more interactions. And as James noticed here, that 2 to 3% of the journalists are left in China. I don't know the figure for exchanges, but I would assume it's something similar. How much of the European are actually traveling to China today? And this comes back to that moral issue. There's no funding to travel to China. And if you accept Chinese funding, you're tainted. That means you can't go. It's a catch-22 situation. So Martin was touching on that sort of freer funding and activities. I think we need that. We need that. If we cannot accept Chinese funding, what should we do? We need to engage. And I think the policy circles need sort of this interaction. And who? There was, I think, we really talked about this easy to deal with universities. And I would actually disagree. It's so much easier to deal with government institutions, at least at our level. Very frank, straightforward. Disagreement, absolutely. Tough discussions, harsh criticism, absolutely. But you know what you get, and you get what you can expect. So there are actually areas where we can engage and need to engage. And of course, despite differences in ideology, I mean, we have a very strong ideology in Europe, so does China. We need to find that areas of collaboration. I'm not going to exaggerate it to say that we can find it everywhere, but absolutely somewhere. But also it's a question of understanding. It's a question of European understanding of China, but as well as China's understanding of Europe. Europe is seen from almost an American context a lot of times in China. And China is not monolithic, I do see that, absolutely. But there's a misunderstanding of it about Europe, and we need to bridge that by interaction, by increased contact. And just to see that sort of the monolithic challenge, we do have a tremendous difference among all these organizations in this partnership, how we engage with China. I have never had any problem getting a visa. It normally takes, a tea break to get a visa. I always get tea when I arrive in China. And if you don't know what tea is, it's somebody meets you up and have a little discussion with you and criticizes you a little bit. But fair enough. There's friendly conversations. Others have huge problems, and I think that also is an explanation why China is monolithic. Depends on who you deal with in China. If you deal with a university, they have certain problems. If you're invited by the foreign ministry, well, of course, that solves these issues very quickly. So it all depends who in China you're dealing with. And I think we need to be much better on dealing with that, but also the Chinese need to be better to be realizing who they deal with in Europe. This goes both ways. So the interaction here helps a lot of people. And unfortunately, I don't think we are there yet. I think China needs to make it easier for us to engage. And maybe be more open in our luggage, be that our ideological luggage or something. And I think Europe needs to open up as well and maybe start looking this from an exclusively moral perspective and actually say, what do we need? What is in our own strategic interest long term? And I'm really happy to hear that when it comes to research and innovation side, there is an openness. That said, I should be very clear that I'm very critical of opening up too much to China when it comes to research and innovation, but so am I actually to other states. Let's be honest here, if the United States takes the wrong turn or takes an even wronger turn, I think we have to be clear that that's not necessarily always a partnership either. So Europe needs to think more about its own research and innovation sovereignty generally. So it's not a question of China, it's a question of Europe. But this said, I mean, this conference, I think, has highlighted a lot of the challenges we're facing, but also maybe some of the opportunities. And I, for one, think that we need to increase that further, not necessarily because we always can agree with China, but rather because we don't want to have a deep moment again. We need to understand what China's doing. We need to be able to analyze China from what it is and not be surprised in the end what China has actually accomplished. And China accomplishes a lot that I think we can learn from. So with that, I just want to thank everyone for this again. And there's a lunch outside, and please keep the discussion, and please interact with the platform, the EuroHub4Sino. We do encourage you to engage, and I think the team has done an excellent job in developing the homepage. So please use that, and we'll see you online if nothing else. Thank you very much.